What is going on, guys? My name is Will from Ghost Hack, and today I'm going to show you how you can make dubstep style basses using a sampler from FL Studio. Now I have a couple versions of one bass here. One is with a vocoder and one is without. It just depends on what you're going for. It's not particularly impressive, but for just using a sampler, not using any kind of expensive fancy plugins or anything, just a sampler and an audio sample, it works pretty dang good. This is the vocoded version. Sounds pretty interesting. And this is the non-vocoded version. Some would argue that the non-vocoded version sounds more full and is richer in harmonics, but the vocoder version just sounds a little more kind of gnarly, kind of froggy if you're looking for a more kind of snails almost style. But either way, both of them sound pretty interesting. I do have a Serum here, but this is just a sub. And I'm just going to turn that off as we're working on the sound, then I'll add that in later. That's nothing complicated. You don't have to do that with Serum. And I'm also going to just take away all the processing on the effects chain. So now it's just the dry signal coming through the sampler. That's what we start out with. Now this right here is the audio file, and what's happening, this is originally just this drum loop. If I hit edit, you can hear the original drum loop. It's just a little kind of breakbeat loop there that I got from a random pack. And we're just using this front kick sample right here. And what I did was I brought the length down. Normally the length is all the way up, but I brought it all the way down until it was just this little section right here. And then I just enabled the crossfade. Normally the crossfade is not even on, it's just like this. So we just have that little start of the sample. But I just enabled the crossfade, just turn up a little bit. And now we can hold it for long periods of time. Now, the wobbling that you're hearing is coming from, first of all, I do have a little bit of volume shaping here. I just added a little bit of attack and made sure that the release just stopped immediately and there wasn't any decay. But the main wobbling is coming from this modulation X, which you can see in the filter. This is modulation X right here. It's coming from this LFO, which I synced to the tempo, and I set the speed to just go at this normal speed. If I turn the amplitude all the way down, this is what it sounds like. So we just have that like solid static sound, and that's what this is. When it just keeps repeating like that, that's all you start with. So for the modulation X, like I said, I put the amplitude not all the way up, but most of the way up, and I left it on just a triangle wave. And for modulation X right here, this knob, just turn it all the way up, and I put it on low pass ×2. It starts out as a fast low pass, I believe, but this is what that sounds like. It works, but I like the low pass ×2 better. It just has a slightly better curve, and once we get into like multiband compression, you would be able to hear the difference later on in the chain, so I just made sure to do that. I did turn up modulation Y, which is actually the resonance. I did turn that up a little bit so we get a little bit more kind of vowel sweeping of the filter, so I just turned that up a little bit. Don't turn that up too high. It gets very harsh, but that's all you really had to do. And honestly, other than pitching it down like half a semitone here just to make sure like it was in key, that's all you need to do for something like that. This is not a hard thing to do. You just take any kind of, it could be a drum loop, it could be a bass sound, it could be any kind of sample. If you just take one section of that sample and loop it really fast, it's almost like a wavetable in Serum. So after that, I just routed it to mixer track 3. And to start off, I just have an EQ here, which is first of all doing some boosting. It's cutting any low sub frequencies and just creating this kind of curve, taking away some of the harsh frequencies and just making it sound a little thicker and cleaner. It's also a lot louder because I brought this little fader / knob thing up. I just brought it all up with the EQ because I wanted it to go through a vocoder. It needed to be a little louder. So once we turn on the vocoder, this is what we get. Before you do anything, make sure both of these are on 0. If one of them's on 1, then it probably won't work or anything. So make sure they're both on 0. It should just start out that way. But I have the wet up a little bit, as well as a little bit of sound goodizing on. As far as the release times here, just make sure that minimum times are selected. You can bring them all down pretty low. It doesn't matter too much as long as you turn it from peak to RMS. After that, I set the order to just this first little bar right here, and I set the bands to 20. So there's not a whole lot of bands. There's a typical amount of bands. 20 bands is usually what I do when I'm putting this on basses. It usually ends up sounding pretty good. For some other ones, I can turn it up higher, but anywhere around 20 bands is pretty nice. And I just found a good spot for the bandwidth and the band multiplier right here. I just found a good spot where the vowel sounded nice. And I brought the this formant shifting all the way down. So it normally sounds like this. But I brought it down to this. It just makes it a little deeper. It gives it more depth in the bottom end there. And other than rolling off this bottom, I really think that's everything I did with the vocoder. It's not too complicated. So from here on out, I'm going to show you the sounds that I'm doing with and without the vocoder. So next up, just flip on a Serum FX. Now I know I said this was just in sampler, you didn't need any fancy plugins, and you technically don't need this. Like, this is just stuff that I like to add because I like to use Serum FX. If you have any kind of effect rack, just fat rack, anything you think could make this sound good, by all means use it. This is not necessary to creating the sound. This is just what I like to do for my post-processing. So let's just go ahead and hop into this and turn everything off. We start with a down sample, and you can automatically hear what it's doing. At the very top end, we have a little more high end coming through, and that's from this down sampler. You can see the mix is moving back and forth with this LFO, and all you have to do for Serum FX to engage the LFO is just hit note latch right there, and then just make sure the LFO is where you want it to be. I want it on trigger on 1/8, which is basically what the wobbling in the sampler is doing. That's the time for that. So I wanted to go up and down, this kind of big crushing. I wanted to go up and down with the sound, because I didn't want it to be like always, like say 100%. I thought that was a little too much, even though it sounds kind of cool. I just wanted to mix it in. So that's all I did there. After that, a little bit of hyper dimension to give it more stereo width. Just turn the mix up on the hyper a bit and turn the mix up a little bit more for the dimension. This is basic hyper dimension stuff. I'm sure you all know what's going on here. Just give it a lot more width in that area. Next up, flanger. I do this in a lot of tutorials. All you got to do is just turn it down a little bit. Normally keep the mix around 50%. In this case, a little lower. It just gives it a little more life. Just keeps the sound kind of moving around. It's subtle. It's a very background thing. After that, you flip on a phaser. And what I'm doing here, I have turned the rate all the way down, and I've just found a nice spot for the phaser that I thought it sounded pretty good. If I turn the mix all the way up, you can hear it. I liked that kind of vowel that it was accenting, so I just turned it down to anywhere around here. It's just a nice layer to shape the vowel. After that, throw on a chorus, and this is a pretty tight chorus. What we're doing here, the rate is fairly low, so is both of the delays. Brought the depth down a little bit, as well as flipping this from a low pass filter to a high pass filter and bringing that up, so we're not chorusing any of the low mud. Then after that, I'm doing the same thing that I did with the mix of the distortion, except I am doing it with the chorus here. I'm just mixing the chorus in as this LFO goes up and down. Just gives it, just a little more spread, a little more width. It's a pretty nice layer. After that, multiband compression. This is going to really bring out the sound. You can see that I'm really driving this. I think all these bands are at 100. Yeah, they're all at 100. I brought the threshold down a good bit, and the gain up a little bit. I also brought up the release past 50%, so we're not like squashing it too hard. We're getting that multiband compression tone that we want, but making sure the tail of the sound is not too muddy. It's kind of preserving the dynamics. So now we get this. And it already sounds a lot better. After that, just flip on an EQ, and this is what we're doing. We're doing more vowel stuff. So we're really using this LFO now. I just turned it on a high pass filter, and I am modulating the Q factor from about 50 up about 16, just a little bit there, so it's going up and down. And then I'm also modulating the frequency back and forth down in this bottom range to give it more of a vowel tone. And you can definitely hear the difference now. First of all, it got rid of like all the messy like sub bass and things like that, and then it also added those vowel harmonics on top. So good stuff there. And without the vocoder, it all sounds like this. so it all still sounds good. But flipping the vocoder back on, let's go up to the next thing, which is of course an OTT. This is free off Xfer, you don't have to pay for this. I brought the time down a little bit, and I brought the depth down a little bit as well, and I think that's honestly everything I did. I didn't mess with anything else. And it's just doing its OTT multiband compression thing. Makes it sound very, very thick. There's a reason everybody uses this plugin. And without the vocoder, it sounds like this. After that, we have just an EQ. There were a lot of frequencies that were kind of harsh. There were still some muddy low frequencies, especially after the OTT. And I just kind of shaped everything out. I think the very, very high end was lacking. I wanted to kind of open up the sound a little bit by boosting the very high end, so I just created this kind of shape. This is going to be different for every sound. This is just specific to this sound. I thought that it needed some bringing down in certain areas and things. So yeah, it sounds a little cleaner now. And without the vocoder. And finally, the last thing in this chain is just a soft clipper. This is a really, really simple saturation plugin. It's not very powerful unless you use it a good bit. I just wanted this soft clipper to just do a little bit of distortion, just makes it a little bit louder and a little bit thicker. So I brought the threshold down all the way and the post almost all the way up to just create this curve shape right here. And this just kind of thickens the overall sound up. It makes it richer. And then after that, just turn on the sub and we have our sound. And again, without the vocoder, it sounds like this. Now I know this sound was not as impressive as some of the sounds you can make in Serum or Harmor or Massive or something like that, but let's be real, this is just a sampler and we are using just one sample. For what we did here, I think we squeezed a lot of power off just this tiny plugin. Also, I mean, realistically, if you're using the sampler instead of a Serum or a Harmor or Massive or something like that, your computer is going to be a lot happier with you. Like your CPUs is not going to have a problem at all with a sampler. So I urge you to kind of throw some different stuff in the sampler, mess around with the other things that sampler has to offer. It also has like ring modulation and other EQs and things like that. I suggest messing around with that as well. You can probably get some pretty cool sounds using some of the techniques that I showed you in this video. So thank you for sticking around with me to the end, and I will see all of you in the next video. Happy producing.